Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today, Masechtas Chulin daf Chavav. We are going to begin on Chav Hey Amud Beis by the second Mishnah regarding the dinim of temed. Now, temed is the process of soaking grape pits in water, and you're doing this for the purpose of obviously making wine. So until it ferments, so then it still has the dinim of water. However, afterwards, then it's wine. So says the Mishnah, hatemed, achel hichmitz, until the fermentation process, it's like water. Therefore, enu nikach b'kesef meiser. Therefore, you cannot purchase with it for meiser sheni money, because you can only use meiser sheni money, as is discussed in Masechtas Eruvin, things like food and the like, not water. Salt, it brings down over there as well. Salt water discusses it over there. So that's the reason why, because it has to be something in which, again, it's some type of food. Now, just water, no. Therefore, also poisel mikvah, because it's considered to be water, so it could passel the mikvah as well. Because in order to have a kosher mikvah, which has to be 40 saw, you cannot have 3 lugin of mayim shuvim, of drawn water. But if you put other liquids in it, which are not considered to be mayim, so then it doesn't passel mikvah. However, mishehichmitz, once it becomes fermented, and therefore now it takes upon itself the status of wine, so nikach becheser meiser, ve'enu paisel mikvah. Not necessarily suggesting you dump this into your mikvah, into your local mikvah, but it won't passel it. Okay, so let's look in Rashi. Yain huskru inin kichas meiser b'shalayim, and it says it's a prat. Marapa mafarish prima pri guduli karka. So Masechtas Eruvin says umayim huskru inin lisel es kamikvah b'shlosh shalugin mayim shuavim nim nafol seichen kaidim. Obviously, once you have 40 saw, a mikvah is kosher. You can put other stuff into it, like we do. We put drawn water into a mikvah after it already has 40 saw. But we're talking about before that. The yayin inu paisel is a mikvah, but wine will not passel the mikvah. It's only gimel lugin of maim shuvim, of water, which is drawn. Okay. So Rashi further says, temed ashul hichmitz mayim ba'almahu. Before it is fermented, it's like water. V'noig bo teres posel mikvah, v'noig bo teres kichas meiser, or v'lachar shehichmitz yinhug bo kichas meiser, v'yinhug bo psul mikvah. Okay, so that's a little bit repetitive, but that's Rashi quotes this a little bit later there. Now the question is ha'achim hashutvan. Let's say you have brothers who are partners in their inheritance of their father's Yerusha. So, Kishachayavin bekalboin paturin b'maiser behema. Kishachayavin b'maiser behema paturin mina kalboin. This primary source is in Shkolim, first parak there. So, sometimes you could be chayav in one thing, and this is the similar pattern we said before. Sometimes you can be chayav in this, and this applies, that doesn't apply. That's the reason why we go straight through until the end of this parak with that back and forth. Now, what exactly is a kalboin, and what exactly is meiser behema? So Rashi says, Cholku u'b'soif nishtatvu. Let's say they divided and eventually became like partners. Chayav b'kalboin. So partners are obligated in the kalboin. So Rashi helps us out a little bit for those that don't remember Shkolim. Kishmavin shiklehen, when you bring your machzas a shekel, mavin shnei chatzoi shkolim, you bring 2 half shkolim, 1 for each brother. V'nois and shtei kalbonos. You also have to give, in addition to that, an extra coin called a kalboin. It's usually for the exchange, for the money exchange. But in this case, they would be required to give 2 kalbonos. Dim nosnu bein shneihem shekel shalim. Let's say they give a complete shekel. So again, the idea is that if you give a machzas, a shekel is one thing, but if you give a selah, and it has to be divided, so therefore there's a kalboin. If it's 2, they have to give 2 kalbonis. because partners are chai b'kalboin. However, they're patim meiser behema, and this may be an interesting loophole if you want to be pot to yourself from meiser behema, get a partner, because kol hanoladon lehen kol yimi shut fasam shashutus pater patim meiser behema, because the pasuk says, quoting Gemara in Baba Basra, Yelucha v'lo shel shutvus. It's you. It's only when it's some lashon yachid. You have in your flock cattle that there's a chiyah meiser behema. So therefore, the other way around, sometimes they could taka be chiyah meiser behema because they're not really partners. Says Rashi, imu cholku me'olam chayavin b'meiser behema. So let's say they didn't divide yet, so it's still considered to be the father's estate. It's considered to be the tfisa is on the father. So therefore, because of that, it's the father's estate, and therefore it's like the father is giving the shekel, so there's no kalboin. However, no chiv of shtei kalbanos. However, because it's not a shutuf yet, because they're not partners, because it hasn't been divided, it's still considered the father's estate. So therefore, it goes to meiser behema would be required. So quotes the Rashi quotes the Mishnah in Shkolim, Hashaikel al yad oni al yad shchenu al yad ben iroi potter. If you give a kalboin, actually, it's not that you don't have to give one kalboin, you don't give any if you're doing it on behalf of someone else. But of nami in mitzvah shekaleim olav. The children do not have to bring a matzah shekel on behalf of their father. V'havilei kishchenu uben iroi. So it's the father's estate, and it's like the father is giving the shekel, but because the child is giving, right? But since it's his children are giving the shekel, so that's why it's no requirement at all. Okay, it's an important Rashi. So with that said, let's see the Mishnah. So ask the Gemara, Mani Masnisin, who is this Mishnah like? Rabbi Yehuda or Rabbanan? Oh, who's that? Who's Rabbi Yehuda, who are the Rabbanan? So we're about to see the Sanya. Hamasamid, when it comes to Temed, when it comes to, again, this process of soaking grape pits in water to make wine, the nice in mind b'midah, and you put water into it b'midah, which is the same amount, and Rashi says v'lo yoser, not any more than how much was in there. Shemati yoser hakol moedim shechayev aser shahar yesh kan yain. If you put more, then it definitely will have the status of wine. Okay, so v'matzah kadei midasai, you found it in this measure. Pater Rehuda Machayev. So you have this machlokas regarding temed, whether or not at this stage you're obligated in giving meiser. So Rabbi Yehuda says you're chayev. Dukuli peirahi. It's considered to be like produce, and therefore you're chayev in meiser. Chamim our point there, he says hoya v'lo noisif bo klum, didn't add anything. Afu b'sheish bo tam yayin. Even though it has the taste of wine, eno klum, it's nothing. So we see that Rabbi Yehuda basically says, let's just keep it simple. Never, Rabbi Yehuda says that you always have to give off meiser, and the Rabbanan say never. So, money, who's our Mishnah like? The hichmetz. Apparently, the Rabbanan will hold even if it already fermented, it doesn't mean anything. It's still going to be potter from meiser. He Rabbi Yehuda with a lo hichmetz. Rabbi Yehuda's mashma maybe that even if it's not hichmetz, it's still chayv in meiser. So our Mishnah has this middle ground. So Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Ravu, as we continue to Chaf Vav Amar Aleph. So bishe hichmetz machlokas. The machlokas between the shita of Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan is only in a situation where it already became fermented. So, and only then does Rabbi Yehuda say you're chayiv. And therefore, must say Rabbi Yehuda. Our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda that says you're chayiv only in that case. If it hasn't fermented yet, even Rabbi Yehuda we moida de la pirahu, like our Mishnah. Rabbanan feel b'shehichmetz pligi. Let's say you have temed that you purchased meiser sheni money with a v'seiv hichmetz kana meiser. Now, we already said in the Mishnah that before it becomes fermented, you can't use it as an exchange for meiser sheni. But over here, it actually gives us an interesting loophole that even though right now it's not considered like wine, but because eventually it will be, so therefore it also takes its chal. It says Rashi, Misha hamois biyadai, someone who has money, yochel ochel chutz Yerushalayim, could eat that or spend that money outside Yerushalayim, mipnei shenischalo al temed, because it transferred onto the temed. So therefore, it's a good transference, and therefore you're not doing anything wrong by consuming this outside of Yerushalayim, the monies that you exchanged it for. So my time, so what's the reason? Because a gali milsum afreya de pirahu, we can retroactively see that this is considered to be at the time of the transaction that was pira. So el masnis and the tani hichmet lo hichmet lo. Why does our Mishnah say that you can't do it before it becomes fermented? Maybe you could do it before hichmetz. Dilma I shavki havi machmetz. Just leave it alone, and maybe in time it will become chametz. It will become fermented. So, and therefore it should work. Why does the Mishnah not say this? Says Rashi, heichadalesa, come on. If it's not in front of us, nizul basaruba, should go after the majority. Baruba machmitzadhein, and the majority of the time it actually catches fermentation. It says you can't do it in Apostles' Mikvah. We see this middle ground that if you don't know for sure that it fermented, in the future it probably will. So it's the kasha. So Amarabba answers that our Mishnah is talking in a situation where you have it already in a cup, and you see volhichmetz, nothing happened. So therefore, you may have tried this experiment, and nothing took hold. And therefore, the fact is, so therefore, in this particular case, our Mishnah says, because it will never become fermented, that's the reason why you can't exchange it for meiser sheni. Rabbi Oimer Hamani Rav Yochanan ben Nurihi. Actually, perhaps we can say our Mishnah that says that before it ferments, that'll passel the mikvah is like the sheet of Rav Yochanan ben Nuri. Who's Rav Yochanan ben Nuri? So Rashi says that he goes basel chazusa. He goes after the way it looks. The Oimer, he says, which I guess let's see the Gemara first, because then Rashi's going to quote a lot of it. Gimel lugin mayim chaser kortav. Let's say you have 2.9 of water, shenafol seichen kortav yain, and it fell into 0.1 of wine. So it equals 3. Umarehin kamar yain, and this mixture looks like wine. V'nafol mikvah pasluhu. That's not going to passel it for two reasons. First of all, because you don't have actually 3 lugin of mayim shuvim, and also because it appears like wine. However, let's say gimel lugin mayim chaser kortav. Again, you have 2.9 of water, shenavel seichen kortav cholav, and 0.1 of milk. Umarein kamar mayim. So it does equal 3, and it looks just like water. So anyone who look at 3 kortav of water would say, "Oh my gosh, that's mayim shuvim. It'll passel mikvah." Now the truth is, we know that part of it is milk. So v'nafel mikvah lo paslu. So Rabbanan say, look at the Metzias. The Metzias is not 3. It's not mayim shuvim. It is mayim shuvim, but not 3 lugin. Therefore, it's not going to passel. Have Yochanan ben Nuri Omer hakol halacha ma'ira. It goes after the appearance, the way it looks, and therefore, even though it only is 2.9, he still says it'll passel a mikvah. So what does this have to do with our Mishnah? Now let's see Rashi. So Rashi says, "Dalzo basar chazus. Aviyamer kurtev chalav mashlim gimel lugim lisol mikvah mishum dieshol maramayim." It looks like water. The hachinami. So too says Rashi here. Afagav de pirahu. Even though this temid may actually have this status of produce, ashul hichmetz before, even before it ferments, because it could potentially ferment. Hoyel v'chazusa maya, but since right now it looks like water, poisel is a mikvah. Gabe meiser nami hoyel v'chazuse v'taima maya inu nikach, because its appearance, and he throws in the word, and its taste is of that of water. Therefore, it cannot be used in the transaction for meiser sheni. So it's an interesting answer. Lalbam Rabbi Yochanan is it not that Rabbi Yochanan says basar chazusa azlina? So achanami zil basar chazusa. V'taima v'chazusa dahai mayaninhu v'taima v'chazusa dahai mayaninhu. Right. So not only is it that it looks like it, but even tastes like water. So therefore, that's more of a reason. Even though it's true, maybe it could ferment. We don't say that we care about that, and therefore, at least according to Shita Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. And this is a Mishnah McVoice, but probably also very well known in the beginning of Masechtas Makos. Upliga de Rabbi Elazar. Diyam Rabbi Elazar Hakol Moedim. Even Rabbi Yehuda agrees. Shein mafrishin love me'makom acher elan kim hichmetz. Even Rabbi Yehuda, who says that it's true when it comes to temed that there's this din of your chayv and meiser, but even Rabbi Yehuda will agree that you cannot be mafresh from another place, el im kein hichmetz, unless it actually has fermented. So, ksavar b'lo hichmetz machlokes. Before it ferments, that's what's the machlokas. V'ad kan lo mechav Rabbi Yehuda el minei. The whole machlokas is in itself. Of an almolo. However, to other places, no. Dilma asu afrushi min achiv al patur and min patur al hachiv. So let's look at Rashi. So the Rashi says in the middle, v'achamrin beper kama de makos the liba de rab the chaser kurtav teninan. It's 2.9 bereisha v'tanakama. Lo zuav zukaim Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri areisha nami polig yasal mem de feel shalugim shleimim arihim kamar yayin upasli. Okay, so Rashi, there's different lashonos in Masechtas Makos. Is it 2.9 or is it 3? Says Rashi in the middle that according to Rabbi Yehuda, he'll say only once it ferments. But if it's the same drink, shul hichmetz lo shma. We don't think about, it will become machmetz v'havi pira. In osil hachmetz, fine. Skipping to the second to last line, machal tevel koyin, so it's considered to be tevel. Shahari ein sham tumura truma chololav. Umachil koyin im alchinam v'tevel b'misa afal koyin. Okay. All right. So let's look at question 1. Hamasamid v'nosamayim b'mida. Rabbi Yehuda is mechayev in meiser. Now, does Rabbi Yehuda say yochel hafresh olav b'makam acher ki yitzebo lo umadua? Okay, you use it from other places. So we said before, maybe the whole machlok is only once it's actually fermented. B'machmitz mafresh olav b'makam acher. Then you could do it. However, below hichmetz, if it hasn't happened, even though maybe it will happen, ein mafresh olav b'makam acher. That even Rabbi Yehuda says you cannot do. Shema echad mehem osel hachmetz. Maybe one of them will become fermented. V'idach lo, and the other one not. V'havi min hapatur al chiyav u min chiyav al patur. So it's a majority, but it doesn't mean it's always going to happen. That's going to ferment. So therefore, you could maybe be chayv meiser on itself. However, if you have one temed and another temed, and we don't know necessarily that both of them are going to ferment, maybe one will, one won't. Therefore, there, even Rabbi Yehuda says that far we're not going to go. Okay. Okay, let's keep on moving. Tanurban hatemed. Okay, we're still talking about temed. So again, temed is the process of soaking grape pits into water to make into wine. So hatemed ashel hichmetz, until the fermenting process, which means it's still considered like water, as our Mishnah said. So at that point, mashiko ibamayim, you can do hashaka. When it comes to a mikvah, hashaka only means kissing, but you can have two waters coming together, and even if all it is a small amount of touching or connection, that will link the two. So therefore, if let's say you have water that was tameh, so if you do hashaka with it, it becomes tahar. However, because it's water, mishahichmitz, once it's no longer water, ein mashku b'mayim, since it's no longer, it's not, since it's wine now, so therefore hashaka won't help. Okay. Says Rashi, umayim metaharim b'hashaka, water can become purified with touching. She'im yeshlo mayim yafim l'shtiya, let's say you have water which is for drinking, v'nitma became impure, v'nosav b'kli, umashkoi b'mei hamikvah, and that kli somehow touches the mikvah with its liquid, ad shenashkan hamayim b'havi chibur, it's like attached or connected, ubatel l'gabi mikvah, it's batel to the mikvah. Shabatul tumasa v'hitayros. So it's almost like it immersed, if you will, into the mikvah. That's how hashaka works. But it's only if it's still water. Omerav lo shanu. The only time we say that you could do this hashaka b'mayim before it became hichmitz, ela shetimdo b'mayim tahirin. It's only talking about that it was temed with pure water, v'nitmu, and then it became tameh. Then it works. Avo tameh mikara lo. If it was tameh from the onset, we'll understand what's the difference, then you can't do this. Well, why not? Just tell me now or tell me later. It's still, why does hashaka not work? We'll see that. So also Rav Gavia b'mekasil amalish ma'isa kamei de Rav Ashi. You don't understand. Ma'ishna tamei mikari deloi. Why doesn't it work? Yamrin and I did maya yikiri, because water's heavy. Shachni tatoi. It like lives underneath. In other words, it may not necessarily circulate. Upera, that's water. Upera kafi mulayil, and the even though it hasn't fermented, it's still temed. It floats up. V'lokasalkalahu hashaklamaya, and therefore it's not going to really mix well. So ihachi taharnu l'sayv tamein nitmunami. So why should hashaka there work either? Ella mivavali hachanami mivavali. All you need to do is mix them all together, and that would be enough. So hakol yachad hamayim v'hayayin shel temed hilchach mahanile hashaka. Actually, it would work. Just have to give a little bit of a stir. Shake and not stir. No, stir. Okay, let's see the next Mishnah. We got three more. Kol makam sheish mecher in knas, or kol makam sheish knas in mecher. Now, this is, as we know, is in the third parak Ksuvas, but nonetheless, the dinim of kanas and selling your daughter as an amavriya, this is the same idea throughout this parak, that what applies here doesn't go there, that there. So says Rashi, when is this? So Rashi helps us out. For those that don't remember Ksuvas, here we go. Kozman shabas katana. If your daughter is under 12, v'yavia zakil moichra, so your father can sell her. So in that time, when she's under 12, in kanas, im nensa, if she was violated on the nispata or persuaded, ein levia chamishim kesef denirixiv. The din of kanas is only when she's already reached the age of 12, but before that, not. So therefore, same way, when there's kanas, which is at the time of a naira, there's no din of mecher. You can no longer sell your daughter at that point. You're not allowed to. Says Rashi, quoting more in Erchin Yochel, Yimcha Adam Bitu Kashi Naira, Amri Kavachaimer Ma, Machura Kvar, Yatzach Shab, Simoni Naira, Shenu Moichreinu Din Shon Timacher. We know, as we saw in Kedushin, the first parak, that one of the ways that an Amma Avriya goes free is Simonim. So physical signs of maturity, which happens at the time of Nairus. So therefore, it's logical that there should not be Mecher, because she will go free at that time anyway. Okay. Amar Yehuda Amar Rav. Zudur Amer. This whole notion of this Mishnah, of this applies when this one doesn't apply, is only like Rameir. The Chachamim actually hold that there is a time of Kanas as well, at the time of selling your daughters to Mabriya, the Sanya. So you can sell your daughter from basically the time she's a little baby until she's 12 years old. But if anything, if she's violated, there's no din kanas. The father doesn't get the chamishim kesef. However, mishavi beis Cyrus, once she's a naira, ad shetibager, so this 6 month break between 12 and 12 and a half, yeshul kanas, here there is kanas, the ein lo mecher, divrei Reb Meir. That's what our Mishnah said. Shahir Reb Meir oimer, kol makom sheish mecher in kanas, v'kol makom sheish kanas in mecher. However, chachamim oimrim katan mebas gimel shanam yom echad. It's actually 3 years old. Ad shet bager, until she's a bageris, yesha kanas. Because until 3 years old, of course, this person should be locked up in jail for the rest of their life. But someone who violates a baby under the age of 3 years old, they're besulim or chayzer. So, but there is a din of kanas only from 3 until 12. Now, kanas in mecher lo, say ma'af kanas ma'akam mecher. So there is actually, you do receive kanas, the father will get the kanas money also there too. Okay. Again, obviously this is always a disturbing piece of Gemara, but it's the Metzias. The reality is that we have to understand what to do with these types of people that are engaged in these terrible behaviors with unconsenting minorities. And there's obviously heavy financial penalties as well as other severe punishments for such individuals. Says the Mishnah, Kol makam sheish miyun in chalitza, v'chol makam sheish chalitza in miyun. So when it comes to miyun, Rashi helps us out what that is. Of course, it's in Kedushin and Gittin and Yavamis. So miyun is biasayma, literally an orphan girl. Shikachua imo avia. It means that her father is not around to have married her off, but either her mother or brother did, which is not a Kedushi Deraisa. V'afilu l'daita, even with her consent, I mean, she's a katana, she doesn't really have das, she could walk out of that at any time, v'yatzabul get, shtei sires. Until she's a naira, this marriage, she can walk out at any time on her own. And therefore, if let's say, Rashi will say over here, that let's say her husband died, so there's no din chalitza. Im yav mahi the ish ksiv b'parsha v'imo yachmotz ha'ish mashin ish ish, etc. So there's no chalitza. So in other words, when it comes to yibum, if tragically a woman's husband dies and they have no kids, so this is the one exception of being able to marry a karaiv, that you marry her deceased husband's brother, which is called yibum. But nowadays we don't do that. We do chalitza, which is this ceremony with a shoe and spitting and the whole like. So that's what chalitza is. So chalitza is only when she's already older. Mian is when she's younger. Omer Rav Yehuda Omer Rav. Zud Reb Meir. Again, this is only Reb Meir. You could do mian even at the time of chalitza, the sanya. Ad matzeh habas mamenes. When can she just walk out of this rabbinical marriage? Ad shetavi beis Cyrus, Reb Meir, which is at 12. Yehuda Omer ad sheyarbe hashachar al halavan, where there's more dark than white, which means that there's more, not just a couple of hairs, but that there is more pubic hairs that have grown in Osum Makayim. So at that place, that's obviously she's already older. So therefore, but we know that she could do chalitza at the time of a naira, but we could see during this window she could still do miyun. It says the last mission of this parak, kol makam sheish tikiya. Anytime we blow the shofar, and Rashi says this is arvei shabbosos v'yomim tovim. We always blow the shofar before Shabbos and Yom Tov. Lavatal asam and menalacha. This is the word Rosh Hashanah. Guben shmashis toikin lahadubin kodesh achoil. So there's numerous times also more in Sukkah and in Masechta Sukkah. A lot of times we blow the shofar. Sometimes 48 times, 51 times over there. Anyway, anytime that we blow the shofar, which means it's before Shabbos, ein havdalah. We do not do havdalah. We know what is havdalah. Havdalah is 2 parts, as Gemara in Brachos says, but tefillah, so Rashi quotes, the alakais, but moitzi shabbosos, we do it at the end. So obviously on the same, we're not going to blow shofar, which is to tell us that Shabbos is coming, on the same day when we make havdalah, when Shabbos is ending. Obviously they don't happen at the same time, but we'll understand this is not such a simple point. That's on a general, simple Shabbos, it's obvious. But Yom Tov Shechol Yos Be'erev Shabbos, what happens when Yom Tov falls out on a Friday? So Toikin, so we end up blowing the shofar, V'lo mavdilin b'moitzi Shabbos or moitzi Yom Tov. So it's interesting. It says moitzi Shabbos. Maybe it should say moitzi Yom Tov. So I'm not exactly sure why it says moitzi Shabbos. That's what the diak is. Because of course we make Havdalah on moitzi Shabbos. Again, Yom Tov, let's say we just had in 2026, Shavuos was Thursday night. It was 2 days, and then Yom Tov, and it ended on Saturday night. So obviously we make Havdalah, but the point is you don't make Havdalah on Friday night, going from Yom Tov to Shabbos, because you're going from a more, a lighter a day, which is Yom Tov, to Shabbos, which is more Chomer. So you're not going to make Havdalah in that case. Mavdilin v'loy toikin ketzad. So Mavdilin, ketzad. So ketzad mavdilin, so how do you make Havdalah? What does that mean? So ketzad mavdilin. How do you make Havdalah? So hamavdil bin kodesh or kodesh. So you would say hamavdil bin kodesh or kodesh, and this is. Let me read this again. Yom Tov shechol yos be'erev Shabbos toikin v'lo mavdilin. Period. That's the right thing. But moitzi Shabbos, right? If let's say Yom Tov falls on moitzi Shabbos, like that's why I was reading it wrong. Okay, so got to put the period in the right place. On moitzi Shabbos, in other words, let's say Shabbos, and then the first day of Yom Tov is on Saturday night. We know we do make Havdalah, right? Yak Nahaz, as Gemara Pesachim says, v'lo toikin. We don't blow shofar. So ketzad mavdilin. So we make Havdalah on Saturday night, going from Shabbos to Yom Tov. What is the Havdalah? So Hamad bin Kodesh a Kodesh, which is what we say. Rav Daisa Omer bin Kodesh Chomer Kodesh Kal, which we don't say. Says the Gemara, Heichi Toikeya. How exactly do we blow? So Rashi says specifically, be Yom Tov Erev Shabbos. When we blow shofar on Yom Tov on Erev Erev Shabbos, which is again it's like Thursday night is when Yom Tov starts. We should do something a little bit different than a typical Friday night. So what is the distinction when we blow shofar on a Thursday night as opposed to a Friday night? Okay, so again the Thursday night is because Yom Tov is coming. So Yehuda Tokei or Maria mitoich tekiya. You do tekiya true tekiya. You do it mitoich tekiya, which means you do it consecutively. Rabbi Yosi Omer Tokei or Maria b'neshima achas. You don't do it consecutively, but you do it in one breath. Iskin Rav Asi b'chutzul kishmaise. So Macy asks a question. Yom Tov Shechol Yos Be'erev Shabbos. When Yom Tov falls out on a Friday, and now it's Thursday night. It's about almost Thursday night. It's almost Yom Tov. So Taikin V'loy Marian. It says we don't do Teru at all. My law V'lo Marian Klal. Lo Rabbi Yehuda Matar Tzatame V'lo Rabbi Yosef Matar Tzatame, because that goes against both answers. Rabbi Yehuda Matar Tzatame Lo Marian. That doesn't mean we don't do Trua. It means we don't do Trua B'fnei Atzmai. We don't do it separately. Mitoich Tekiya. We do it consecutively within the tekiya, like without even having a second break. It just goes straight in. Rav Yosef Matot Tamei Lo Marian B'Shtei Neshimos. We don't do two breaths. El Neshima Achas, one breath. So Heichi Armula. So where exactly is this Havdalah recited on Saturday night? So Rabbi Yehuda B'Chetimata, at the very end of Kiddush, that's where you'll end, and you'll say Bein Kodesh LeKodesh. Techenim Rav Nachman B'Chetimata, same answer. Rav Sheshes Rav Idi Amar Af B'Techiyata. Actually, you should also do it at the beginning as well. Says Rashi Maskil Hamadu Bein Kodesh LeKodesh Bein Or LeChoshech V'Leis Hilchos HaKavasa. We don't hold like that. Okay. Says Rashi. So only B'Chetimata shall Havdalah Avo B'Techiyata Lo. Who Aimer being Kodesh Achoil, the Kach Anu Nohagen. Our minute we say being Kodesh Achoil in the regular paragraph, which is the normal Nusach, because that's what our tradition is on a typical Saturday night. But instead of being Kodesh Achoil, because obviously it's not Chol, it's Saturday night now is Yom Tov, from Shabbos to Yom Tov, so there you would say being Kodesh Kodesh. And then of course Yak Nahaz, you have just going through it. You have Yayin, Yak, Kiddush, Ner, Havdalah, and then Zman, the Shechianu. It doesn't get into that here, but again, it's discussed at great length in the last parak in Psachim. Okay, let's finish this parak. Rav Daisa Omer being Kodesh Chomer Kodesh Tekal. Let's say Omer Rav Zera Yom Tov Shechol Yoyis Be'emsa Shabbos. Let's say Yom Tov falls on a Tuesday. So what do you do on a Monday night? So Omer Hamal being Kodesh Shechoil. Bein Or L'Choshech Bein Yisrael Wami Bein Yom Hashvi L'Shishim Yamasa. Now, if let's say Yom Tov ends on ends on a Thursday night. So what are you saying? Bein Yom Hashvi. We didn't experience Shabbos at all. My time is Sefer Havdalos Hu Moina. We basically just will follow the typical Seder of Havdalos, and therefore that's how it's done, but it's not necessarily, it's not an issue, so that's okay. Okay, that's it for question 1. Let's see. TA. TA 24. Okay, so as we mentioned, either we do it like below Nishima or Nishima Achas, it should really say, right? Below Hefsik, or Heim Oisin Bavas Achas, namely consecutively. Okay, that's TA 24 on Chav Vav Amud Beis. And let's take a peek at TB 27. Exact same question. TB 27, they do that a lot. They have to ask the same questions. So I wrote Terua B'toich HaTekiya. Okay, Osa HaTekiya Nishima Achas. Good answer. This concludes the first parak. We're now going to continue with the second parak starting tomorrow. Let's just start the first line. We know the distinction, not by karbanos, but by chulin. Now when it comes to an animal, we have to shecht roiv of the veshet and the kana. Masha'inkin, when it comes to the bird, only one siman is necessary. Ad kan.